It's like this class of people that you're talking about that can't understand that it's not my job as a voter to inspire myself to vote for you. It's your job as a candidate or as a party or as somebody to build a vision that inspires me to vote.
This is Ben Cohen, the ice cream guy, and you're listening to my hero, Ralph Nader, the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host, David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, Steve.
And, of course, as always, our producer, Hannah Feldman. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Steve.
And it's not a Ralph Nader Radio Hour without the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody. With Trump planning to scuttle the elections, he's actually said in January there shouldn't be any elections in November. We're going to have a refreshing progressive Democratic voice on this show, Corbin Trent. Stay tuned.
That's right, Ralph. Our first guest is progressive organizer Corbin Trent, the co-founder of Brand New Congress and former co-director of Justice Democrats. He has also worked as national campaign coordinator for the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign and recently served as the communications director for Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. He and Ralph are going to do a deep dive in what has become a common theme on this program: what is wrong with the Democratic Party? We plan to cover a lot of ground, including the war with Iran and the failed War Powers Resolution vote, how the Democratic Party has abandoned its base and failed to inspire voters, and how to fill the progressive political void. As always, we'll take some time to check in with our tireless corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, why the Democrats won't save us. David?
Corbin Trent is a co-founder of Brand New Congress and a co-director of Justice Democrats, two grassroots organizations working to elect progressive Democrats to Congress. He was the national campaign coordinator for the Bernie Sanders campaign and recently served as the communications director for Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. He writes about rebuilding America at americasundoing.com. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Corbin Trent.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Corbin. And David neglected to say you're a graduate of the Culinary Institute in New York State. You are a general contractor. You've been in business experience before you went into progressive politics.
I was in furniture manufacturing, furniture component manufacturing for years ahead of my entry into politics.
I see. Good. Let's get going here. You have a withering critique of the Democratic Party, which we'll get into. Our listeners have been treated to a lot of criticisms of the Democratic Party, how John Kenneth Galbraith warned them in a Harper's article over about 50 years ago that they'd become too much under the influence of corporate power, and that undermines the whole raison d'etre of the Democratic Party, he said. In the year 2000, Robert Reich, who's the former labor secretary under Clinton, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post starting out saying the Democratic Party is dead, dead, dead. So there have been critiques, including ours, and it doesn't seem to change anything. This is a party that is led by sinecurists and apparatchiks who never look at themselves in the mirror after they lose to the most vicious, cruel, ignorant, anti-worker, anti-women, anti-environment, anti-small taxpayer, pro-war Republican Party. They never look into it. It's always they blame the Greens or they blame some third party or independent candidate. And they never ask themselves, why, as a national party, did they abandon half the country, which are now called red states? I had a discussion with Ben Barnes, a very knowledgeable politician in Texas once, and he said, Ralph, when the Democrats abandoned being competitive in the presidential race in Texas, that reverberated all the way down to dog catcher. It destroyed the whole party. And of course, it led to the election of extremely right-wing state legislators in places like Florida, Alabama, Texas, etc. So with that background, I want to ask you, and we name names on this program. Hakeem Jeffries is the leader in the House for the Democrats. Chuck Schumer is the leader in the Senate. Give us your take.
I mean, I guess they're leader by name. The Democratic Party, I think, ultimately is leaderless because it's visionless. It doesn't really see. I don't think the Democratic Party as a entity or as an ideology has a real vision for how to go forward differently, and therefore it's hard to be led. It's hard to lead if you don't have a direction. So I think Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, the best they can do is try to sort of cobble together the leadership and direction of getting us back to, I don't know, 2010, 2009. I don't really know what time period they want us to go back to as a nation, but I do know that it's not one where workers are empowered. It's not one where we're building our private or public ownership. Like one of the things that surprises me is we look at healthcare, and this is one that I talk about, look at a lot, because it costs us around $6 trillion a year. $6 trillion a year we spend on healthcare, really bad outcomes. It's not as though we're leading the world in very many areas at all in healthcare, except spending. And the Democratic Party, basically the best they can come up with, even the people that I sort of, have been inspired by, like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC, the best they can come up with is Medicare for all, which is simply single payer insurance. That's it. That's all it does. It doesn't at all go into building public power to fight the broken system itself. So, you're just dumping money essentially into a completely broken system. If 6 trillion isn't getting us there, I'm not sure 8 trillion will, or 12 trillion, or, I don't think you can spend your way out of these problems. So the Democratic Party, like your Chuck Schumers, like your Hakeem Jeffries, and like most of the people that are elected there and in leadership positions at all, look at this system, the system of neoliberalism, and they think that somehow it's going to magically start working again. And the fact is that it's not. They have been unable so far to internalize the depth of the brokenness of this system, and then really unable to, I think, really internalize why Trump was powerful, why his messages were powerful. They want to look at it through this extremely narrow and negative lens of racism, bigotry, and fear, as opposed to a complete and utter disdain for the system in which is sucking from their lives and extracting from their communities. And I think that spells trouble.
Well, before we get into that, you're describing what John Kenneth Galbraith called the contented classes. These people are in the upper income. They don't have to worry about health insurance. They don't have to worry about getting a mortgage on their home and being able to pay every month. They didn't have to worry about unemployment compensation. They're part of the rich upper class, number one. Number two, they don't even listen to their own progressive wing. Now, just this week, the Joint Economic Committee came out with a devastating report on Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is a nice word to indicate the corporate takeover of Medicare. They have now unrebutted put millions of dollars on ads inducing uninformed elderly people to sign up for Medicare Advantage, which we've called over our programs Medicare Disadvantage. The report that just came out, backed by Republicans and Democrats, of the Joint Economic Committee, said that there are billions and billions of dollars of overcharges every year, and that everybody in Medicare, traditional Medicare or Medicare Disadvantage, is paying the bill. So what else do they need? Now, are they going to take the lead on this? Of course not. They were part of the cabal in the Congress that created Medicare Disadvantage, the Democrats and Republicans. Just the way, as you point out in your column, they are joined at the hip with the Republicans on unlimited military budget, unaudited military budget, giving the generals more than they asked for, adding to the military budget request from both parties' administration. So how do you analyze the way the corporate Democrats who dominate the party, led by Schumer and Jeffries, are treating the progressive Democrats?
I mean, I think it's very much like they treated the progressive wing since the Clinton era, since, Rahm Emanuel and the Obama era. Candidate Obama was the first political rally I ever went to. It was 2007, I guess. He was a very inspirational candidate, and then he was a very depressing president. So I was on MSNBC last night, and I'm sitting in the green room with Michelle Goldberg, who was a writer for the New York Times. And we're having a conversation before we go on. And I'm telling her that I've voted 4 times in my life, right? And she is like appalled that I've only voted 4 times in my life. One of those was for you. One of those was for Barack Obama, and the other two were Bernie Sanders in the primaries. And, it's like this class of people that you're talking about that can't understand that it's not my job as a voter to inspire myself to vote for you. It's your job as a candidate or as a party or as somebody to build a vision that inspires me to vote. Like, not only am I can be inspired to vote, like when it came to Bernie Sanders, I quit my jobs and I went volunteering across the entire country to try to help him get elected. When it came to people like AOC and others, I left my family and moved to New York. Like, I'm very inspirable. I can be inspired to do a lot, let alone vote. I can definitely get to the polls. I will disrupt my entire life for you if I think that you're going to go to bat for me and the people from where I'm from, which is Northeast Tennessee and the Appalachian region. So, when I look at how these Democrats have been treating the progressive wing of the party, they have pushed it into sort of a fetal position of this just sort of beaten and abused political movement that's unable to start leading, that's unable to start thinking outside the box, and then they've just got them backed into a corner. Like, again, you talk about Medicare disadvantage. I can tell you how bad Medicare is because where I'm from in Lenore City, there are all these facilities that say, we can help explain Medicare for you, come and we'll talk you through it. I went to my 1-year annual physical the other day, and a guy comes in there. It's probably in his 70s or 80s. He's got an oxygen tank. He took an Uber to get to the doctor. Well, it turns out it's outside of his network because he has AARP Medicare or whatever it is, and they only take the other 30 kinds. And I'm watching people at the desk try very hard to work with him to figure this out. And then the process is so complex and complicated. He spent like $40 getting there. He doesn't have enough money to get back home. The doctor ends up buying him an Uber to get him back. And then they get him all of these numbers to call and how to get the right Medicare for this particular facility. It's completely and utterly dysfunctional. Nobody argues. And yet, the Democratic Party can't come up with a solution. The Republican Party can't come up with a solution. And they've got progressives so afraid of being blamed for a Republican winning that they don't want to come up with a solution, right? And I think it's a real disservice and has been for decades and decades and decades, the American people. It's led us down a road where fascism starts to look like an alternative that maybe we should do this instead.
Well, let's zero in on the progressives, including two you worked with, Bernie Sanders and AOC. The Democratic Party, among its other suicidal decisions, has cut off for years now the connections with progressive citizen groups and progressive unions. It's very hard for us to get through to anybody who can make decisions for the party. For example, I knew Bernie Sanders before he was mayor of Burlington. I would go up there speaking at the University of Vermont, get together with him. He hasn't returned a call in 26 years. The only time I talked to him personally was when I was in the Senate barber shop, and he was in the barber chair and he couldn't move. And he is very cordial when you talk to him. And he said, let's have lunch. Call so-and-so in my office, which I did, and it never materialized. Now, I've always praised Bernie. I've suggested things to Bernie. He doesn't return calls. He doesn't meet with civic groups and plot strategy the way Senator Paul Wellstone did. He's more like a lone ranger. So I called AOC many times, Jayapal many times. I went and sat in AOC's office waiting to see her. She's never returned a call. The only person who returned a call is Rashida Tlaib. And this is true in the House side as well, except for Jamie Raskin, who now doesn't return calls, but he did a few years ago. I knew his father very well. Had they listened to our proposals, which not rocket science, they're the old FDR-type proposals updated, higher minimum wage, a real full Medicare for all, single payer, replacing the health insurance industry, cracking down on corporate crooks and corporate crime that are bleeding consumer dollars and consumer savings, revising the whole tax system, which is a monstrosity, where the rich pay less than the middle class, as Warren Buffett has pointed out, changing foreign policy, cutting the military budget, putting the money into public works and repairing America, on, all wrapped up in something called a compact for the American people. So people know what the Democratic Party would stand for. They don't know what it stands for, if anything. So how do you explain the progressives themselves cutting off access to the two pillars that made so many Democratic Party victories possible many years ago?
I mean, I think it varies based on the person. I think as inspired as I have been and as much of a fan as I am of, say, of Bernie Sanders, I think that your assessment of him as a sort of a lone wolf is very, very accurate, right? Is that he is sort of a loner. That's just part of his personality. But then, whether it's AOC or Jai Paul or all these people, I think for different reasons, they have to believe in a way that the Democratic Party, at least a big portion of the Democratic Party, represents their values and just wants to go about achieving those goals in different ways. In some ways that, oh, that's more pragmatic or that's possible, that there is a lack of ferociousness in their belief in their own ideas, and that they're easily cowed in some regards or easily convinced that these other Democrats are part of a team that they are not. I think it's hard just from a personal level, unfortunately, for people to go into a system with, the House or the Senate or wherever, and then work with people that seem like they ought to be aligned with you, but then recognize them as your political opposition, even though they're in the same party. Like when I started Justice Democrats or Brand New Congress or any of these organizations, the idea that I started with, the understanding I started with, is the Democratic Party, as it stood, was my political adversary, but that it was a nice vehicle for ballot access. It was a nice vehicle. A lot of the voters out there, a lot of people that think of themselves as Democrats, the rank and file, people in my community that are Democrats, they shared my values, they shared this vision, but the people in power in the Democratic Party had to be replaced. And so that meant that you were going to go through years and years of primaries. You were going to have to raise millions of dollars. You were going to have to go after them tooth and nail. And I think that for a lot of people, that life, living in a scenario where you're actively against people that you're working with day in and day out, is such a hard thing to do that they don't want to do it. Like, the funny thing though, the people that I worked with when I worked on the Hill, Rashida Tlaib was the one that treated me like a human being and talked to me and, hey, Corbin this, hey, Corbin that. And for whatever reason, these people, when they get to Congress, they start to think of their job as just sort of maintenance as opposed to reconstruction. And I think when you talk about things like going back to an FDR style Democratic Party or an FDR style rebuilding of America, it seems so foreign to them. It seems so anathema to the way that they want to conduct themselves. The first Democrat that I ever met with was Steve Cohen out of Memphis. And it was one of the most depressing meetings I ever had. He was telling me how basically he's powerless. He can do nothing. It's hopeless. Congress is just a mess and nothing's ever going to get done. And I left that meeting thinking to myself, well, why the hell are you here? I don't understand. Why don't you give up your seat? If you think this, if you're not engaged and excited every day to go fight to figure out how to make what you just said not true, it's the same as like when they say, oh, the banks are too big to fail. Well, the next thing you should do is make them not too big to fail. If your job is so boring and depressing but you can't get anything done, then you should make sure you clear the chaff and beat the people that are making it so. They don't do that. They just want to go about their day and live their life. It's just like I attribute it to, the only reason we can do this stuff is when we have these Great Depressions or these world wars or this, is because then it forces you to say, okay, work has to be done. We're going to have to put all the different dinners and stuff on the back burner and all the fundraisers that we love doing or don't, whatever, on the back burner, and then we can get to work. So, and that's what I've been trying to push with it, whether it was the Green New Deal or this or that, the other. Now it's Vision for America. It's the same kind of work that you're trying to, I'm just trying different brands essentially. And the thing is, like, if we want to, we can choose a different path. We don't have to wait for World War III. We don't have to wait for a depression brought upon by AI killing the top 20%. We can do this deliberately. What this takes is unity and a mission. What this takes is a vision and then people deciding to walk down that. And it ain't going to be the Democratic Party. And as long as Bernie and AOC still think it is, then they're going to be unable to lead us towards that future.
Well, listeners, people who want to read the whole recent article by Corbin Trent, it's called "Why is the Resistance Failing to Resist?" Because too many Democrats in Congress don't actually disagree with Trump, and explain that stunning statement.
There is so much over within the Democratic Party's sort of corporate base and too many of that. And a lot of what even MAGA Republicans want to accomplish, let alone the centrist Republicans. I mean, I think one of the things that we're seeing in this war, for example, with Iran, is we're seeing a very limited vision for how America can stay competitive with China. When China is developing the technology of the future, they're leading the revolution on renewable energy, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal. They're even working diligently to try to get themselves off of oil entirely. They're trying to do coal, liquid, they're doing all sorts of things technologically, infrastructure. They're going around the world building infrastructure for people in Africa and this and that. They're building goodwill. And they're shipping out water filtration systems, power generation systems, while we're shipping out bombs and death and genocide, And so, unfortunately, the Democratic Party seems to be more in this sort of like Henry Kissinger neoliberal idea that we can control some oil, we can control this, we can control that. And that's how we'll maintain our position in the world. We've got the world reserve currency, we've got this. And they also fundamentally believe that this economic system, this neoliberal experiment that has failed miserably for the majority of American people in the last 70 years, is the best choice we have. They believe wholeheartedly the same as MAGA does, the Democratic Party believes this, right? And I think that unity of economic vision, that unity of global domination, that unity in how to compete in the world, thinking of China as the enemy, when they think of this axis of evil, that phrase in and of itself, whether, they try to say it's Iran and China and Russia or whomever they put in the axis of evil this week, too often you've got Democratic Party leadership, Democratic Party electeds that will basically agree with what the MAGA nuts will do too. It'll be a little less openly Christian nationalist. It'll be a little less like the thing that I was on again, MSNBC yesterday, and Chris Hayes says he's talking about using U.S. Navy vessels to protect the Strait of Hormuz, right, and try to move the oil through there. And he says, do we think that U.S. military people should be risking their lives for oil? And I thought, what the hell kind of statement is that? Why do you think we've been in these wars? Why have we been doing what our entire foreign policy has been for the last 50 years? Has been for oil. And you're going to say, like, that is the one thing that I do like about this Trump regime is that, my God, they take the pretense out of it. He says, we're doing this for oil. We're going after Venezuela for oil. Not like we're going to go to Iraq to deliver them from the guy that we empowered for years. And so the difference between a lot of the Democratic Party and this particular regime is the lack of pretense, the openness of the corruption, the openness of the fact that, yes, we're going to go kill people and kill American soldiers for oil. It's not something we normally would just say. We would say it's for something else. But the reality is we know what it's for.
Well, just to interject here, they don't represent the Democratic voters who are overwhelmingly against the illegal, unconstitutional war on Iran. Well over 80%. Only 7% of the Democrats support this war. 7%, listeners. And we have a Democratic Party leadership that Corbin Trent describes in this way, quote, "This is where the American people need resistance, war, regime change, bombing a country we were actively negotiating with, killing a head of state and over 100 school children in the same weekend. And Democratic leadership isn't just failing to resist, they're actively working to make sure nobody else does either," end quote. This is the Israeli government can do no wrong lobby, AIPAC at work, controlling Schumer and Jeffries. Jeffries once said Israel could be one of the boroughs of New York City. That's what he said. He's a great receiver of AIPAC money. So
I've never heard that.
What do you mean they're actively working to make sure nobody else does either?
Well, I mean, so they have, for one thing, they've, of course, channeled and signaled that they're for the regime change, and they're really excited that they're going to have probably not only no political consequences, but political upsides. They've signaled that over and over to make sure that people aren't actually going out there speaking too loudly against it. But then the one thing that really proved to me, and I think to anybody that was watching it, was the fact that there was a resolution by Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna that was out there to strip war powers resolution that was going, that if it got the signatures, it was going to be forced to a vote. And that could have pulled back the unilateral capacity of this president to go to war. And not only did the party not whip to make this happen, they actively tried to stifle it using back channels. And it's clear the reason they did that is because they wanted this to happen. They wanted this war to happen, damn the consequences. And in fact, so cynically, they were thinking any consequences that come from it are going to get owned by this president and we get to benefit from it. So those dead school children, we get to use that for political ads. We get to use that for political expedience. To hell with the school children. This will help us win power. Win power for what, though? Why do I want these Democrats in charge when they have such similar goals, such similar worldviews, and such similar long-term visions, which are basically death, destruction, empower Israel's ability to maintain our access to oil in the region, use our military as a way to grow our influence instead of our innovation and our manufacturing and our capacity to do things and provide comfort and security for the world through something other than guns, And what's funny is the Michelle Goldbergs, the people over at the New York Times, when they hear that I've not been inspired to vote except for 4 times a month, they look at me with disdain. They look at me through this lens of I'm part of the problem. Right. And I would say that, hey, just because you've not had a Democratic Party that even resembles the one that my grandpa would tell me, that's not my fault, because you fell in love with the corporate interest, because you fell in love with neoliberalism, because you thought that this was that exporting our jobs, that exporting our capacity, that extracting from West Virginia, extracting from Appalachia, extracting from Ohio, extracting from the Chinese, and this colonialism at home and abroad was the way to go. That's on you. And I don't know if you can tell, but it sort of enrages me. And people say, why are you so angry at the Democrats and not the Republicans? Because I never once, or even an iota of a moment, thought the Republicans were on my team. Not ever, right? But there were glimmers of hope in my life where I thought possibly the Democratic Party could be on my team, could fight for working people, could fight for an America that I can be proud of and believe in. And they have disappointed me at every turn. So hey, if a guy throws a Molotov cocktail in my house and sets it afire, I'm going to be very upset with him. But when the fire department shows up and refuses to put it out, I'm actually going to be madder at them because they're here to help put out fires. The dude that came through was an arsonist. I have no doubt about that. I don't like the arsonist for sure. But the fire department, the good guys came and didn't help. I'm even madder at them.
Well,
and that to me was the Democratic Party.
Look what's coming up in Congress. So get your view. Israel's going to send the bill for the Iran war to the Congress again, greased by AIPAC lobbyists swarming over Capitol Hill. What do you think the resistance is going to be this time? They rubber stamped over $16 billion right after October 7th for the Israeli military and other demands by Netanyahu. You think he's going to get away with it again? Or you think there's enough resistance building up? The Progressive Caucus is chaired by a very progressive member of the House from Texas, Cesar. What do you think that battle's going to be like?
I don't want to sound like a cynical dude. I guess I am, though, is the problem here. I have not seen the Progressive Caucus flex muscles to do much of anything. Say what you want about the Freedom Caucus or the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world. And obviously, I don't respect anything that they've accomplished. But they have a set of goals, they have a set of ideals, and they fight tooth and nail to achieve them. And their political consequences be damned. Marjorie Taylor Greene's not in office anymore. And they're willing to sacrifice their political careers to advance an idea. And I've not seen that from very many Democrats. There are not a ton of Democrats that are willing to do that. What I think the resistance will be there is they'll say, are you sure that's all you need? Are you sure we can't give you some more? Just like when they ask for military funding and they say, are you sure we can't up that a little bit? My guess is that we're going to continue to fund the IDF and help. We're going to continue to arm them as best we can. We're going to transfer weaponry to them continuously. And we're going to see continuation of raids in the West Bank. We're going to see the genocide. I mean, the genocide is continuing in Gaza. It's getting way less press now, but there's still no food going in. There's still no water going in. It's not like this is stopped.
Well, on March 28th, there's going to be the third massive rally under the title No Kings, run by Indivisible. I have said that this is an obsolete demand. We have a vicious, cruel out of control, crazed dictator at the helm. It's becoming worse, and it will become worse under Trump, much worse. By the week, we can see it happening. And they're still having a No Kings rally. They expect 10 million people. They could say to them, get out your cell phones. We want to raise $50 million right now to organize powerful groups in every congressional district pressing for impeachment and removal from office of Donald Trump. They're not doing that. So you founded a group called Brand New Congress, where the focus has got to be. It's all about Congress. It's the only major tool to turn the country around, and there's only 535 of them to work on. You're also a co-director of Justice Democrats. They're grassroots organizations working to elect progressive Democrats to Congress. So what do you think of the major mass rally movement in America, No Kings?
So I've been to all of them, and the energy's there. The enthusiasm's there, the energy's there, the leadership is the vacuum. The leadership is the vacuum. And it's the same thing. I wrote a piece called The Right Builds Movements and the Left Builds Rallies. And, that's unfortunately what we do. It reminds me of the New Deal coalition. You could not have a New Deal coalition unless you first had a New Deal, right? So the New Deal, it wasn't just FDR's idea. There were a lot of people, socialists, communists, and various other people pushing these ideas that ultimately became the New Deal. And then eventually you had a coalition of candidates, a coalition of incumbents around this big idea, right? And the problem is with the No Kings, any of these groups, Gavin Newsom is a great example, is that they aren't pushing for anything substantially different other than, No Kings. Yeah, okay, No Kings, great. But Congress has abdicated its power over and over again for political expedience. They can have wars without taking any political hits. Essentially, the more power they give to the president, then the less they have to take on politically as far as being able to be attacked in an ad later. And as far as the Constitution goes, the House of Representatives and the Senate are the most powerful bodies in our government, period. If they are in lockstep as a supermajority to do things, they can remove corrupt Supreme Court justices, they can remove executives, they can do constitutional amendments, all the things that we need to do, they can do if they're united in an effort to do it. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that level of unity since the 1930s, 40s, and 50s when we had supermajorities. But the one thing I will say that is sort of exciting is that when you look back to, say, right before the Depression, you had Hoover, you had a trifecta of Republicans. And then there was this big movement to do something major for the American people, do something transformational. Now, interestingly, it was to stave off the communists that were getting a little bit of enthusiasm, but still. And what that led to was a massive turnaround of who was running Congress. It went from a Republican trifecta that was barely in power, sort of like the one we have now, to supermajority Democrats that could indeed do all of the, like people keep saying, we need to get money out of politics. Well, friends, ain't getting money out of politics unless you can pass a constitutional amendment. That's the only way you're going to overturn Citizens United. And to do that, you have to have a huge political movement that elects a supermajority of people behind that idea. So there's this disconnect between what we want to achieve as a nation and as a people, what the actual political recipe to get there is. And so you see all these Democrats, they want like a reasonable Republican Party. Well, I want a Republican Party small enough that we can drown it in a bathtub. I want a corporate Democratic Party small enough that we can drown it in a bathtub, So the idea, I say this needs to be a political take no prisoners. Let's move this damn thing forward and have faith in our country, have faith in our countrymen, and have faith that we can still do stuff as a nation. And until we get that vision back, I fear that Congress isn't going to do it.
Let me put before you another example of what we tried to do that illustrates your point. Quote, Democratic leadership isn't just failing to resist, they're actively working to make sure nobody else does either, end quote. In 2024, we got together with some progressive labor unions, the postal workers, the flight attendants, and others, to make Labor Day really Labor Day, rather than a day for corporate salesmanship, and build the momentum for November in 2024 on behalf of progressive candidates and progressive agenda. And we took it all the way up to the AFL-CIO, Liz Shuler. On a telephone call, she was so excited about it. She really said, this is a great idea. So we thought in July, they would announce it. They would tell the locals, to start getting ready for events, connecting with citizen groups, connecting with progressive elements all around America who need a focus and are willing to roll up their sleeves and go to work. And we were very excited because there wasn't much momentum with Kamala Harris. She was campaigning with Liz Cheney. So July came and went, and there was no word from the AFL-CIO, the go signal to the locals and the union membership. And so I called up the head of the postal workers, Brother Dimmenstein. And I said, what's going on? He said they passed it by the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party nixed it. They nixed it.
Right.
And I can say with full confidence, had that grassroots movement on Labor Day been allowed to proceed, Trump would not have been president. You know, it's only 240,000 votes in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that elected him president. Just 240,000 votes. So how do we get out of this grip that the Democratic Party has in a 2-party duopoly? They can't defend a republic against the worst, most vicious Republican Party in history. How do we get out of that?
So it's both the Democratic Party, the DNC, the DCCC, all these acronyms that make up the party. But then I can tell you another story similar to what you just told me. So I'm working on the Hill in AOC's office, and we're trying to pass an amendment that strips the Hyde language from all of the Democratic bills coming out of the House, because it's the democratically controlled House. And the Hyde language is what says no federal dollars can be used for reproductive rights for women, abortions, and various other things. And we thought it was sort of ridiculous that a democratically controlled House would write bills that already have that language, which ostensibly we're against in them, right? So simple ask, we're going to put an amendment up. We found a way to force the vote on it. We're going to do it. And we're getting ready to start whipping votes for it. And we start getting calls. The calls we get, though, are from Nader and Planned Parenthood. They're from like the upper presidents of these people saying, please don't do this. It will embarrass the Democratic Party. It'll show that there's division. It'll show that we're not in lockstep as a party that is for women's reproductive rights. We have a 10-year plan, and this is in 2019. We have a 10-year plan to really codify Roe and to protect women's reproductive rights. Now, we ended up ultimately backing off and letting Ayanna Pressley's office do a version of this that was non-binding and more sort of ceremonial. And so the very groups that women and men that are fighting for these rights, for women's reproductive rights, that are donating their dollars and time to these organizations to help them do the fight that they're theoretically fighting, that group actively worked against us to try to expose some Democrats for being actually pro-life. And they had this 10-year plan that ultimately, we know how that 10-year plan ended up, which was the repeal of Roe versus Wade and so on and so forth. The missions that these folks exist to do, they are too afraid to actually go out there and fight these fights, whether it's economic, whether it's social. They just don't have the courage or the conviction of their beliefs to go out there and do this work. And so when I was with Alexandria, we created this short film called A Message from a Future with AOC. And this was supposed to be, I'm kind of obsessed with world fairs because I think they used to help America and the world see that there was a path towards something, a future that was brighter, sort of like a sci-fi version that's not Night of the Walking Dead, where sci-fi is very, very negative these days, right? But this was more positive. And we were going to say, okay, this is a post-Green New Deal world, very beautiful. So I think one of the things that we've got to do in order to build political power, political movements, is to be able to have a population that sees something different as possible, that has a goal to shoot, that has a world of plenty, a world where we can go to see doctors, a world where we can get decent wages for our time, a world where we can afford to buy a house or rent a house or whatever it is we want to do. And that seems so detached from possible now that I think people have sort of given up. They've lost faith and hope in their political system. They've lost faith and hope in their government. And so we're having to sort of rebuild from all of this cynicism and doubt. And I think it's going to take people turning on the Democratic Party from within the Democratic Party, or it's going to take a third party starting up. And those are so damn expensive to get started and so complicated to get started. I don't know that we have the time for it.
Well, you know, it's interesting you mention all this because I once met Norman Thomas at Princeton University. He's a graduate, and he came to lecture when I was a student there, and I I walked him back to his hotel and I asked him, Mr. Thomas, what do you think your greatest achievement is as head of the Socialist Party? He said, having Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Democrats steal so much of my program. He was referring to Social Security. He was referring to unemployment compensation, minimum wage, regulation of business, etc. But I know some of our listeners are saying, if you had a viable third party that was progressive and basically said to the Democrats, if you don't adopt this agenda, you're going to lose more votes because we're going to have a competitive democracy and you don't own all the votes on your side. You got to earn them. What is your position when people say, what about the Green Party? What about third parties? What about different kinds of agendas to put on the campaign trail to unlock the grip of the war-mongering, corporatist Wall Street grip on the party by the party leadership, like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries?
I think it's an extremely important way to go. I mean, like you said, the New Deal became the New Deal. A lot of the things that came out of that, and then even into the Great Society stuff, happened because of socialists, happened because of communists, happened because there was an alternative, right? And there was something to defend against, and it made the Democratic Party better. They were better because they had a very strong progressive, and they had a element of politics that was actually in favor of seizing the means of production. So therefore, they had to negotiate. They had to make themselves palatable to people that were considering them. And right now, the only people they're competing with are Republicans. And the Republicans are getting increasingly more fascist, increasingly more crazed. So they find themselves moving further right. And there is no anchor to hold our politics, our political spectrum into a wide. The political spectrum in FDR's this vast. It really went from communism to fascism. And you got a cool Democratic Party out of that, or at least a decent one. And as that's condensed, then it's become less and less useful as a Democratic Party to the vast majority of this country. So I would love to see a powerful third party. I would love to see, when I was in AOC's office, I said, Medicare for all, great. What we should do is do DHS or VA for all. We should be an alternative. We should make Medicare for all a right-wing middle ground or whatever. Need to move the window. That's our role. That is the role that we are here to fill.
Well, it sort of gets worse. You listen to the Democratic Party leaders, they don't even say Social Security benefits have been frozen for over 45 years. It's time to raise them and increase the taxes on the rich, the Social Security taxes, which are now capped at about $170,000 of income instead of, say, on their millions of dollars of income to pay for it. All they say is we're going to protect Social Security, like we're going to hold the line from having it corporatized by the Republicans. On child tax credit, they cut poverty in half, children poverty. They're mealy-mouthed on that, even though it's overwhelmingly supported by conservative and liberal families who know what it means for them and have very low income. The same with child care. A lot of throwaway lines that don't mean anything, which is why people don't believe the Democratic Party. But I thought your most cogent point, Corbin, was this phrase in your article, quote, as I told Salon before the bombs even started falling, the Democratic Party that exists now in Congress is very much a party that's aligned with the war machine and has been for decades. The core, the corporate Democratic Party, which is the one that's in charge right now, has been fully in lockstep with the Republican Party on this. That's one of the places where these two parties have been merged for quite some time. And you say, it's not just your opinion, you cite other people who believe the same thing, who are inside the Congress. And then you have something to say about Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania. What was it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, John Fetterman, I believe, has shown us that a person that ostensibly runs as a progressive and is going to be a stalwart Democrat is still absolutely 100% involved and committed to the AIPAC war machine and committed to the general war machine. There is no line. There is no line in the sand for them. There is no amount of death and murder and destruction that can cause him to back away from that position. He is, the Catholics call it, invincibly ignorant. He is just locked into this world where our ability to stay where we're at in the global pecking order is determined and is involved basically through our military. that is the lens through which the majority of the Democrats view this. That's where they viewed it since Iraq. That's why you had one lone vote against the Iraq War resolution. Not one. There was one vote against this in the House, right? So to me, it's bizarre to even think that it's debatable that this Democratic Party is anything but aligned military industrial. They've proven it time and time again through war funding, through surveillance capacity. And John Fetterman is, I think, just indicative and shows exactly what this Democratic Party is because he's a little bit more open about it. He's sort of a Trumpian corporate Democrat where he just says what he thinks instead of dressing it up in some sort of political speak. The rest of them, Slotkin's the same way. There's so many Democrats in the Senate, so many Democrats in the House on some gradient of how open they'll be about it. But they're absolutely in line with funding the Israeli IDF, absolutely in line with funding all the military bases that we keep around the world. And they have no vision for how to change that period.
Let's go to David.
So I think what would save the Democratic Party is a Southern strategy, because that's where the economic immiseration is, and that's where the New Deal coalition without the racists could be. They had a Southern strategy in 92. You had Clinton from Arkansas, Gore from Tennessee. And then, as you just pointed out, they abandoned the South. Al Gore would have won in 2000. He didn't need Florida. All he had to do was carry his home state of Tennessee, and he would have been president. That was the problem. So let me ask you about Roy Cooper, North Carolina. He's running for senator, Democrat. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, Democrat. To me, without knowing too much, they seem like the golden ticket for the Democratic Party to win the South. But are they going to do, if they became president and vice president, would they do what Clinton and Gore did to the South?
I fear that they would, because I fear that their ideologies are, I think we're still in this situation where most people in politics, and especially have been there for a while, are still captured by the neoliberal mind, virus, and they look at the markets, they look at the private sector as the way forward. It was also Ford that worked on creating an executive order to take anything out of the government that wasn't like direct government job. And so started privatizing a lot of the things that we thought of as state services. And until you get an alternative to the sort of neoliberalism really embedded into somebody's mind, and then they can start looking at the various barriers that are in the way of reinstating it, then I think it's going to end up in the same way, because they're going to get in rooms with the serious people that are going to tell them what really is happening and how to do things. And they're going to be too easily swayed by the status quo, because it is a powerful thing. So if you look at the statistics, then if you look at real wages or household income, all the stats tell us that neoliberalism has made Americans at every level of income more and more wealthy. Sure, the wealthy have gotten more rich than the poor. Sure, the distance between the rich and the poor has grown, but everybody's better off. That is what the official statistics tell us. Now, I think everybody listening knows that that's a lie, but it's confusing. The official statistics tell us that our reality that we live in is wrong, and I think that's a hard thing for people to internalize. So then what does that mean? What do we trust? And until people start trusting their gut, start trusting their eyes, and start trusting what they hear from people that they talk to and their constituents and the people that they're trying to lead, and instead they trust math that has been manipulated and, what did I say, lies, damn lies, and statistics, until they internalize that, I think we're going to end up with the same thing. And I think that's what, Mr. Nader here, the plans that you all put together, until somebody brings that in and owns it, and then starts going out there as a presidential candidate and knowing that they've got to get Congress, knowing that Congress has to be along with it, that they can't do this alone. That means that they're going to be campaigning up and down the ballot all across this country with people that are willing to support their agenda. I think that's what we're going to need. And I hope 26 and 28 I hope Trump proves eye-opening enough for people, but I just believe that too many people have gotten the wrong lesson.
Corbin, taking off on David's question, are you heartened by the victory of the Senate candidate for the Democratic Party in Texas a few days ago?
I think Tallarico has a lot of potential. I think that he is somebody that has, he reminds me a little bit of Jimmy Carter when he talks about why he believes what he believes. It seems to come from a place of faith in that sort of thing, which I guess is useful. My experience in the Bible Belt has been different than a lot of people's. I didn't come out of it as devoutly Christian as you, as you would think. But yeah, I think James Tallarico has a way about him communicating and connecting with people. But I do think he's still missing some of the key elements how to change Americans' lives quickly. I don't think we have time to go about this in a Barack Obama slow roll. I think we've got to really go again because we're working against generations of cynicism, generations of government failure, and generations of people not believing that the government can provide them a better way of life. And I think that is what's led to the market's dominance. It doesn't have a competitor. So until the public sector can compete with the private sector in improving the lives of people, Amazon sends you all these packages really quickly with a smile on the box. We've got to be able to compete with it.
Let's go to Hannah.
My question's about the reality of being a progressive legislator in Washington. In order to win in her district, AOC had to make promises to her constituents, to her voters in the Bronx and in Queens. So appealing to the people she's allegedly going to Washington to work for, but actually operating as a Democrat on the Hill, I imagine you have to make promises, convince people in your party that you're there to work for the party. So what's the actual, maybe not like the time split, but how much time does a progressive Democrat really spend serving their constituents and how much do they spend serving their party?
I mean, it depends on what you look at as serving your constituents, I guess. So, like one of the things that Alexandria was extremely interested in, really done an amazing job of doing it, even with her campaign and her office, is providing like specific and literal actual services to her constituents. Like during COVID, they were doing tutoring, free tutoring. They were giving out backpacks and laptops and spending lots of time and money really helping the people in the community. And so to that, in that way, she spent a lot of time and effort helping the people in her district. Then if you look at it, though, more from a 30,000-foot political viewpoint, right, how do you help your constituents? You do that, I imagine, at least my theory is you do that by building a national movement to replace dead wood in the Democratic Party. You do that by building this national movement with a national vision, by expanding people's hopes and dreams and opportunities. Now, you mentioned that she has, as a Democrat, she would have had to work with the Democratic Party. It actually turned out, I was there for the first year of it, you don't have to. In fact, she didn't. She didn't pay DCCC dues. She didn't do anything. She was free for a variety of reasons. One, because she had so much attention and so much press capacity. Two, because she had a donor base that was not at all tied to the leadership of the Democratic Party. She did not need them at all. The only reason you would need a Democratic Party is if you played by their rules. Nancy Pelosi had zero power over her unless you say, I'm going to now determine my efficacy on how many bills or amendments to pass. And if you want to pass basically meaningless bills or get basically meaningless committee seats, then yes, the Democratic Party has power. But if you want to bring about a transformational movement to carry the country forward, then then the Democratic Party has no power.
Well, we're out of time. We've been speaking with Corbin Trent. Before we conclude, how can people connect?
Well, right now, people can find what I'm doing at America's Undoing or a fightworthhaving.com. I'm working with America's Undoing at americasundoing.com, and it's not as negative as it sounds, americasundoing.com. And then the new endeavor is a fightworthhaving.com. So, because I think America is a fight worth having, and I think this is the time to do it.
Thank you very much, Corbin. You're a refreshing voice, and you've gotten on MSNBC, and I hope you get on a lot of other mass media.
Well, thank you so much for everything you've been doing since you've started doing it. You've been an inspiration to me for the last 30 years since I've been paying attention to you.
You're very kind. Thank you, Corbin.
Thank you, sir.
We've been speaking with Corbin Trent. We will link to his work at RalphNaderRadioHour.com. Now let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
The National Press Building in Washington, D.C. This is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, March 13, 2026. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Corporate lawyers now know that under the Trump administration, it is likely that their major corporate clients will not be criminally charged for such serious crimes as violating laws governing foreign bribery, pollution, and consumer protection. What's a corporate lawyer to do? Leo Strine has some ideas. Strine was Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court from 2014 to 2019 and is currently of counsel at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz. Last month, Strine delivered the David S. Reuter Lecture at the Securities Regulation Institute in Coronado, California. The title of the lecture, Practicing Law in a Lawless Time. Strine said that it is important that corporate lawyers and top corporate leaders stand their ground on a basic, nonpartisan proposition. We are a nation under law, and the law should apply to everyone in an equal, non-discriminatory manner. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman, Hannah, and Ralph. I want to thank our guest again, Corbin Trent. For those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's free at nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, it's at corporatecrimereporter.com.
The American Museum of Tort Law has gone virtual. You can visit tortmuseum.org to explore the exhibits, take a virtual tour, and learn about iconic tort cases from history.
To order your copy of the Capitol Hill Citizen, Democracy Dies in Broad Daylight, it's at capitolhillcitizen.com.
And remember to continue the conversation after each show. You can go to the comments section at ralphnaderradiohour.com and post a comment or question on this week's episode.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer is Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody. Contact your senators, representatives. I got to hear from you before this war gets massively out of control in the Middle East, promoted by Netanyahu and his servile supporter, Tyrant Trump.
Stand up, step up, you ought to step up. Rise up, I know you ought to rise up and stand up, stand up. You've been saying, I think you should step up. I think that you should step up. Rise up, don't let the system hold you down. Stand up, stand up. You've been saying, step up, I think you should step up, and you rise up.